Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Excret Nunez. Today, we'll tell you about more changes coming to Milwaukee County's transit system because of a budget deficit. Then, we'll learn about another lawsuit against a Trump administration policy, this one related to environmental protections.
Regulating greenhouse gas emissions is the right thing to do to protect public health. And if we roll those back, we're going to be experiencing some real problems here in Wisconsin and across the country.
Plus, we'll catch up with the voter we spoke with in 2024 to see what they think of President Trump's second term so far.
There's a really clear before and after for me where I think fear has consumed my life for the past year.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excret Nunez. Thanks for joining us today. Starting this Sunday, the Milwaukee County Transit System, also known as MCTS, will shorten some routes. Riders will also need to wait longer for their buses at some stops. The reason why MCTS is doing this is to help deal with the $14 million budget deficit. You may remember that bus fares also went up by 75 cents at the beginning of this year. To learn more about these most recent changes, WUWN reporter Catherine Kokel is joined by Jesus Ochoa, the Systems Director of Service Development.
Okay, so we're here in March. You and I spoke a couple of weeks ago regarding the first phase of changes to the Milwaukee County Transit System, and now we're coming up on phase 2. Can you explain for people who may not be familiar what changes are going to go into effect this weekend, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this weekend, we will be rolling out our second phase of changes as part of our 2026 budget. There will be 5 routes that will be shortened on one end with a few frequency reductions in the schedule starting this weekend.
Excellent. And I'm looking at a map of the segments of the routes that are going to be eliminated. And it's kind of like if you put a circle over Milwaukee where downtown is the center, it's kind of like around that very edge of the circle. Can you explain why those segments are being targeted for elimination?
Yeah. So as part of this overall plan, we looked at areas that had lower ridership historically, areas that are predominantly kind of on the fringes of their routes to ensure that we were preserving as much of that service where people are riding most. So yeah, you'll see that, on some of the routes like Route 11 west of 92nd Street, on our Route 80 north of kind of like Florist. And then we have a few routes that are still kind of in the core, like a Route 22 that will end at Locust and Humboldt. However, there are some routes in the vicinity that riders can take advantage of.
So we kind of know where these route segments are, but I'm wondering how you actually choose them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, when making these difficult decisions, we have to look at a lot of the data that we have. So we have a lot of ridership data and trends over time by bus stop, by trip. That we can narrow down and say when are our buses full, when are maybe they less full. But we also have a lot of demographic data that we use and analyze at a very granular level to really pair with that ridership data. Anything from zero car households to population, job density. And you can even break down those population densities by subtypes, right? So you have persons with disabilities, perhaps seniors, youth. We use all that information to ensure that when making these difficult decisions, we're impacting the least amount of people. We never want to, impact our riders, but when we're making these decisions, we have to really ensure that we're serving as many people as possible, and also looking at options that may be in the area. So if there's duplicative service, or maybe there's a route that's nearby that can get riders to a similar destination, those are the types of things that really went into this to ensure that we're doing this as equitably as possible.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're looking not only at how many people are using this segment of a route, but like what the conditions are around the route and what types of access people have to transportation around the area that's going to be affected, right?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. We want to ensure that, we're looking at access to bus stops, right? So in our industry, about 1/4 mile of a bus stop is what most people are willing to walk. Some of us can walk a little further and some of us can walk a little less. So really using that demographic data ensure that perhaps a senior that may not be able to walk as far as someone that might be a little younger. So we look at all that information to really help us paint the picture of ensuring that we're serving as many of our community as possible. And when we're making these difficult decisions, we want to minimize that impact as much as possible.
When we spoke in January, we talked a little bit about the reason for these changes. And bus riders will know that the base fare has also increased this year. It's probably a little too early to see any major data in ridership changes, but these changes are as a result of a $14 million gap in the county transit system's budget. And our county transit system is unique in the sense that it doesn't have a dedicated funding source. And so I know you specialize in routes for this system. How do you continue to serve people while you're also dealing with budget gaps? Obviously, the ideal situation in transit is that buses come quickly and they are regularly available.
Absolutely, yeah. And frequency is we know that the more frequent route is, the more likely riders are going to ride it. So for us, we want to preserve as much of that network as possible. We all have different starting points and ending points. So whenever we're planning for situations like this, we want to ensure that we're looking at it in a way that we're minimizing the impact to our riders and looking for areas where perhaps there's duplicative service or service nearby that can get a rider in close proximity to what could be reduced or eliminated in this case.
I also had a question about the frequency with which buses are coming to stops. So in addition to some of these changes that are taking place and segment elimination kind of at the edge of the routes, people are also going to have to wait longer for their buses. Can you run through a few of those changes and when people can expect to see them?
Definitely. And that's a big part of this as well. And a big reason why we wanted to start some of these changes in March instead of January. To give riders a little bit more time to adjust to their new schedule, adjust to perhaps a new route that they may need to take to get to their destination. So for many of these routes, there'll also be a frequency adjustment. So your trip may come at a certain time today. You may have to wait a little longer, or your trip may require a transfer. So in the case of some of these routes, like Route 22, for instance, that goes to UWM, we were intentional about ensuring that the connection with our Route 66, which is a little bit more frequent than the Route 22, happens in an area that riders can connect to just to get to UWM. So I would implore that our riders go on our website, take a look at the new schedule, use the real-time information on the apps to do a little bit of trip planning as part of their upcoming, the rest of their semester, if you will, since these changes are happening in the middle of March.
Absolutely. When I look on MCTS's website, you can see detailed information on the website, which is ridemcts.com. There is detailed information about these changes. And then when you scroll to the bottom, it says summer changes 2026, fall changes 2026, winter changes 2026. And all of those areas just say TBD. Do you expect that there will be significant changes to our transit system coming up later this year?
So as part of all these changes that are happening, my team is taking a look at, how are these impacting our riders, right? We're hearing from riders now, we're hearing from riders from the January changes. So as more data comes in, we'll be looking to see where can we make changes within our budget. Although it is TBD right now, our team is working diligently to see where we can make improvements within our means.
And I will mention that although there are potential changes to routes and schedules coming up later this year, TBD, as you say, the system has confirmed that there will not be another change in fares this year. That's my understanding, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Well, the little piece of bright side news is that there were 25 new bus shelters that were kind of plopped all over the map throughout the winter season. Are there any other good pieces of news that you'd like to share?
Yeah, definitely the 25 shelters. If you see them, we haven't had shelters in a while, so we're really excited. They have our logo on there. There's a nice little blue awning on these, and they're distributed across the county. High ridership areas where there's lots of transfers, lots of activity. So you may see a few out there and say, "Oh, that looks new." Well, it is. It's brand new for us. And we're also very excited about our new bus signs. So we call them internally blades, but they are the signs that have the routes on them. What you'll notice about those is that they are branded similarly to our new bus colors, but you can also see them at night, which was a key part for our bus drivers to really be able to visually see them, especially when we have snow in Wisconsin. Sometimes our old bus signs could get covered with snow, making them not legible. The ID on those new signs is very large, and then we have a QR code as well on those signs. So we're really excited about both of those infrastructure pieces.
Okay, I've actually noticed a few of those signs in my neighborhood, and I know I'm a bus nerd and I get that, but I was walking the dog and I was like, wow, that bus sign looks really nice. So at least one person has taken notice of the new bus signs.
Awesome. No, we're really happy about them, and you'll be seeing more of the old ones being phased out over the course of this year.
Well, exciting news. So there are always silver linings in the world of transit. Well, thanks so much for speaking with me about this today. It's really important information. I will take this moment to say that updated route information is available on WUWM's website, that's WUWM.com, as well as the transit system's website, that is ridemcts.com. Thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
That was Jesus Ochoa of the Milwaukee County Transit System, speaking with WUWM reporter Catherine Kokel. Milwaukee County Transit is a financial supporter of WUWM. Environmental and health organizations around the country recently filed a lawsuit against the Environmental Protection Agency for rolling back climate protections. The EPA plans to eliminate greenhouse gas rules that regulate power plants as well as car and truck pollution. One of the organizations suing the EPA is Clean Wisconsin. It says a U.S. Supreme Court that determined climate pollution impacts human health is critical to the lawsuit. It led to what's called the endangerment finding. WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bentz is joined by Clean Wisconsin's Amy Barrio and pediatrician Beth Neary to talk about the case.
The endangerment finding really started with the 2007 Supreme Court case, Massachusetts versus EPA. And in that case, the Supreme Court decided that the EPA could determine whether or not climate change was a danger to human health. And if it was, then they were obligated to do something about that under the Clean Air Act. And so the EPA took that 2007 ruling and did a lot of research, and in 2009 came out with the endangerment finding that concluded, yes, greenhouse gases are a danger to human health. And so since then, we, of course, have got a lot more data to show that climate change is harming people. It's harming human health. Right here in Wisconsin, we know there's been a threefold increase since the 1980s in severe storms that caused at least $1 billion in damage. We've seen in the last few summers had some of the worst air quality in the nation and even the world because of toxic smoke from wildfires that are, of course, made worse by climate change. We've got an explosion in tick-borne illnesses here in Wisconsin. The number of reported cases of Lyme disease have quadrupled in the last 20 years. So we're just getting more and more evidence that that endangerment finding by the EPA in 2009 was right. And that regulating greenhouse gas emissions is the right thing to do to protect public health. Those regulations include standards for emissions from power plants and from cars and trucks. And if we roll those back, we're going to be experiencing some real problems here in Wisconsin and across the country.
So, Beth, how do you see the role of the endangerment finding in protecting public health?
Well, basically, the endangerment finding sets the stage for regulations to protect us from health effects of climate change. And one thing I want to comment is the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine did a report in September of 2025, and it was a comprehensive review of all of the evidence since 2009 when the original finding came out. And in that, they looked at the effect of greenhouse gas emissions and their effect on climate and health. And not only did it stand the test of time, but it actually was reinforced by even stronger evidence since 2009. So we have a stronger case today.
So, can you underscore the health concerns?
Yes. Well, I'll talk about it in 4 different areas: vector-borne illnesses, respiratory illnesses, effects of just extreme heat alone, and food and water issues. So what's important to know is to connect the fact that greenhouse gases actually trap heat. They act as a blanket, creating a warmer environment. So what does that do? Well, the first thing it does is vector-borne illnesses, and what I mean by that is viruses or diseases carried by a tick or a mosquito. It actually allows them to expand their range and actually reproduce faster because we have longer seasons with warm weather. So what diseases that were once considered tropical, West Nile virus, dengue fever, chikungunya, they're now in the United States, and we have seen a doubling between 2004 and 2016 of diseases like this. And when we think about that, I mean, these are viruses. There's actually no treatment for West Nile virus or for dengue fever. Lyme disease, we do have treatment for, but if it gets to the point where in the 3rd stages, it does affect the brain. So we are definitely seeing impacts of greenhouse gases affecting human health. Respiratory problems, as Amy mentioned, in terms of increase in wildfires. And we saw that in Wisconsin just a few years ago when we were all looking at, well, are we purple today? Are we red today? And so it was even presenting difficulty breathing for people with normal lungs. But when we think of children with asthma or adults that have respiratory disease or cardiac disease, it's even worse. Extreme heat alone can actually cause deaths, especially among the elderly. And then when we look at the effect of warming temperatures and changing rainfall, we see more flooding, which allows pathogens to spread. We see more diarrheal illness, lack of clean water. So all of these things connect back to greenhouse gases to affect human health.
So, Amy, if you would lay out this lawsuit, Clean Wisconsin is one of a number of organizations, there's both health and environment, that are bringing this case.
Well, I mean, the case is relatively simple, which is there is no legal or scientific basis for repealing the endangerment finding. And in fact, as I mentioned, this has already been litigated before the Supreme Court. So this is established law. This is something that falls directly within the EPA's responsibility. You know, the EPA has a federal mission set forth in statute to protect public health. Not to protect oil and gas companies, not to, as our current EPA administrator has said, make the United States the AI capital of the world. That is not the EPA's mission. And so in this lawsuit, we are very clear that the Clean Air Act requires the EPA to protect public health by setting standards when it comes to pollutants that are going to be harmful. And there is, as Beth said, no end to the evidence that greenhouse gas emissions are harmful. And in fact, some types of greenhouse gases can combine with other pollutants to form, ground level ozone and other kinds of harmful pollution. That isn't just a long-term concern, but it's a near-term concern for people who live in Wisconsin. Southeastern Wisconsin is in non-attainment for ozone standards, federal ozone standards already. So these rules that the EPA can implement because of the endangerment finding protect public health every day and are the main tool for the EPA to protect us from climate change. So again, this lawsuit is basically saying the EPA cannot do this. It has no basis to toss out the endangerment finding.
In the Federal Register, the EPA states the EPA determines that the Clean Air Act does not authorize the agency to prescribe emission standards in response to global climate change. Amy, you're saying this is wrong.
Absolutely, it is wrong. Again, the Clean Air Act requires the EPA to protect public health from air pollutants that can harm them. That was a ruling that was handed down from the Supreme Court in 2007. It told the EPA to figure out whether or not greenhouse gas emissions are harmful. The EPA did just that and said, yes, our analysis and our research concludes that greenhouse gas emissions are harmful, so we're going to set standards, and now we have standards. And that is just exactly the way the EPA is supposed to work. And any kind of notion that the EPA should not be doing this is kind of throwing out the whole purpose of the EPA altogether.
So, Amy, what can the public expect to hear or see next in this case?
Well, after the EPA, makes this attempt to repeal the endangerment finding, then there's 30 days for groups like Clean Wisconsin to basically file suit to try to stop that. So we're in that 30-day window still. So right now, there could be other groups that come out and try to take legal action against this illegal move by the EPA. So we'll wait for that to play out, and then we'll see this case as it makes its way through the courts. And, I've been asked, well, what do you think the Supreme Court's going to decide if it makes it to the Supreme Court? Because I have different folks on the court these days. And all I can say is that the law is so crystal clear here. This has already been litigated. And so if anybody looks at the legal facts that are at play and the, again, mission of the EPA that is set forth in statute and the mission of the EPA under the Clean Air Act, then this is clearly an illegal move by the EPA, and the environmental groups and health advocacy groups that are suing should win.
Amy Barrio is the communications director with Clean Wisconsin, and Beth Neary is a pediatrician and co-president of the Wisconsin Environmental Health Network. They spoke with WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bentz. Do you need some flexibility for when you listen to Lake Effect? Well, you can listen to us on demand. You can find Lake Effect as a podcast wherever you like to listen. Download it and enjoy on the go. In about 15 minutes, we'll speak with Milwaukee's International Women's Day Coalition to learn about the events they have going on this weekend. But first, we'll catch up with the voter we spoke to in 2024 for a WUWM voter roundtable. She shares her thoughts on Trump's second term and how federal policies are impacting her. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excurrent Nunez. Milwaukee hosted the Republican National Convention during the summer of 2024. It brought then-candidate Donald Trump and other Republican leaders to the state. But just ahead of that, we got a group of conservative-leaning voters together. At the time, all of the voter roundtable participants planned to vote for Donald Trump. Now that Trump has been in office for a little over a year, we're checking back in with some of them to see how they ended up voting and what they think of Trump's second term so far. Giselle Vera is an education advocate in Milwaukee. Here she is catching up with WUWM's Mayan Silver.
Giselle Vera is Latina, the daughter of Mexican immigrants. She's 25 years old and values her education. This was how she explained it in the 2024 Voter Roundtable.
So I am a beneficiary of the Milwaukee Parental School Choice Program, and my sisters now attend a charter school.
Back then, she told us she was thinking of voting for Trump because of his support for school choice. School choice programs in Wisconsin provide taxpayer funding for families with limited means to send their children to private schools. Charter schools are another alternative to traditional public schools. They tend to have more freedom in their operations, usually in return for higher academic results.
One of my sisters is autistic, and her school has played such a huge role in her being confident in going to university after. And so as us three just being the first in our family to ever be educated, coming from a father that, he was a fisherman, my mom was a housewife, our education matters so much to us. And so to know that we live in a community where our schools are underperforming and these options are kind of like our way to escape generational poverty.
Historically, school choice policies are more supported by Republicans. You might remember Trump's former Secretary of Education in his first term, Betsy DeVos, as a major advocate for alternatives to traditional public schools. Vera has worked for a pro-school choice organization. But out of the 5 conservative-leaning voters we spoke to in 2024, she was the most tentative about voting for Trump.
To be very transparent, it was a very hesitant yes. And I remember saying, I will doubt it up until the moment I go to the polls. It's going to be a hard yes. And I was like, well, I don't want to feel that way. I want to be proud of my vote.
The roundtable at WUWM was sort of a turning point. She said she enjoyed talking to the people in it. But because she was so conflicted, she turned to her friends, including Kamala Harris supporters. She started asking them questions.
Kind of like mimicking the roundtable, but with my friends. And I was like, tell me your best arguments, your worst arguments, what are you frustrated about? What do you hope, Kamala's administration will bring? And what are the things that are moving your needle towards the left?
Vera learned about Project 2025, became more concerned about Trump's rhetoric, and those things started to outweigh his education policy. When the November election rolled around, she ended up voting for Kamala Harris. She says, looking back at the Biden administration now, she understands why she was able to consider being a single-issue voter.
That fact that we were living in a country in a time where none of the additional things in my life were making noise, where education was the most important thing for us. And so I now reflect on it. It's like, that was a privilege, because now we're in a time where we have so much noise and we have so many other things that are affecting our day-to-day life that 4 years ago we took for granted, or that I took for granted.
Vera says as a second-generation immigrant, a big part of that is Trump's immigration policy.
There was a part of me, I think, that a lot of the Hispanic community also felt that, comfort in saying, well, the things that they're saying that they would do, they wouldn't actually ever do. That's just campaign talk. There's no way. There's not a legal way that they could do that. There's not a moral justification for those kinds of things. They're just talking to their base. And for me, it was just not, I wasn't willing to find out if it was just kind of locker talk, or if it was seriously what they wanted to do. Those people that they were talking about are my family, my parents.
And are there things that have been happening with this immigration crackdown that have affected you personally? Do you feel safe in your community? Do you feel like you can walk without ID? Are there people in your family that have to take steps that are, how is this affecting you and people you know?
Well, I come from a mixed status household. So part of my family has been affected. Some other part has not directly been affected. Like, I'm kind of just waiting on it to come upon us, and I pray that it doesn't, but it could happen to us at any moment. And that's really hard to have to live with on a day-to-day. I think everything that I feared would happen during President Donald Trump's first term is happening now. So as a 16-year-old, I kind of felt like this would happen, and I was relieved when it didn't. And then now, in this last election, I was like, well, he kind of talked the same talking points last time. I don't think he'll actually do anything. And so that was like the rude awakening now of these past 2 years. There's a really clear before and after for me, where I've told my friends, my family, it's like, I think fear has consumed my life for the past year. And when I think about myself as a younger adult, even a child, I never thought of the U.S., of a place where that could happen to you. Like, it always symbolized this country of hope and opportunity. And my parents always spoke of the U.S. in a way where this was where the American dream came true. And so to see that turn into, in a very cliche way, into a nightmare, and it consuming me, even though a lot of people could say, well, what are you afraid of? You're an American citizen. Like, if you haven't broken the law, nothing should happen to you. We're seeing young kids that are U.S. citizens being dragged out of their workplaces, asking themselves to ID themselves, and really being profiled for being Hispanic. And I think that no matter your status, that should never happen in our streets. It compromises who we are as a country, and everyone should be heartbroken by what is happening.
And you've talked about being a woman of color, being a daughter of Mexican immigrants. How does that shape what the Republican Party can represent for you and what it can't, kind of thing?
I think I'm just very grateful for my experience in my life and in my work, where I know that what's happening right now in an administrative level doesn't necessarily represent the Republican Party as a whole. I have mentors and friends, people that I've just come across that are also feeling like this has gone too far, and that doesn't represent the values of the Republican Party. And I think this is like a critical point in our country where we have to come together and say, this is not what represents us, and this is not right, and we have still time to make things right. Because if we continue to go down this path, I don't know if we'll be able to recognize our country after 4 years.
I asked Farah what she's watching for from the candidates in the upcoming 2026 midterms, which involves elections for governor, Congress, the state legislature, and the state Supreme Court.
Everything. We have to pay attention to everything. And I think these past 2 years have shown us that we can't afford to not care. And I think especially like even especially in our local level, we should be involved. We should be actively voting because it is a enormous privilege to be able to say who represents us.
That was WUWM's Mayan Silver speaking with Giselle Vera. She participated in WUWM's Voter Roundtable discussion in 2024. You can hear from the other roundtable voters we caught up with at WUWM.com. As a reminder, this is a midterm election year, and WUWM has what you need to feel well informed. You can check out our voter guide at WUWM.com. Still to come, we'll celebrate International Women's Day with a conversation about the role women play in our lives. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. This is Lake Effect from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excret Nunez. This Sunday is International Women's Day, and to celebrate, we passed the mic to two organizers from Milwaukee's International Women's Day Coalition. For this month's group chat, Kayla Patterson and KJ Johnson talk about what womanhood means to them and why the fight for reproductive justice continues. They also highlight the events the coalition has planned for this International Women's Day weekend.
To you, like, what does it mean to be a woman?
Means to be, heard, present. I guess more heavy on heard. For me, it really just means being outspoken or, not jumping to that kind of gut reaction to shy away that I feel like we're all just kind of, since birth, right? They just kind of, they want to make you the dormouse. They want to make you a little bit quieter. But I really do think that, in this day and age, in the big 2-6, we need to be loud and we need to be proud.
I really resonate with that, especially the part you're saying about being heard. Whenever I think about being a woman in terms of how womanhood was always described to me growing up, it's almost wow, they were really just trying to convince who we are based off of who we are not.
Right.
And I think there's something about voice that is so fundamental to that. Right, because clearly, I don't know, listeners can't hear us, but I'm a white woman, you're a black woman, so it's
yes.
How do you think voice shows up in identity for you as a black woman?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the point of race because I think it's there's an expectation for me to be loud, but in the trashy quote unquote ghetto, that kind of way, not in a coherent worth listening to kind of way. I guess it's being black while being a woman, I guess. So it's you have that double-sided of they're expecting you to be loud, but it's also no, you're still a woman. We expect you to keep your opinions to yourself. So it's it's this weird back and forth. So I can see it sometimes. I don't know, at work, I think it's a thing. If I'm having too much fun, kind of thing. Then it's well, okay, guys, get back to work. And it's well, was it everyone? Was it just me? Who was actually not at my current job? Let me be clear before. Maybe my boss is listening. It's not you.
We love Rocket Bakery.
we love Rocket Baby, guys. No, but you notice it growing up, and then I think the workplace is one of the places where it becomes clear of what year is it, guys? We're still doing this, that kind of thing.
Would you feel comfortable kind of sharing more about just through your relationship with other women in your life in general, whether that's family or strong friendships you've had, and how do you see solidarity being built within, identity, specifically womanhood?
I guess I can start with family. I have a sister, my mom, it was an all-girls pretty much household except for my dad. Shout out my dad. But yeah, and then maybe a little bit more towards political side of things. My grandmother, she was an MPS teacher. She's retired now. But before that, in her youth, as an MPS student, she marched with Father Grappi for civil rights. So I think hearing those kind of stories, and again, I don't know, there's a trend of no boys at least on my mom's side. She has 4 living sisters So like, I don't know, just hearing like those stories of how they made it through tough times. It's a different kind of girl power when you're like on segregated buses. Like that's something else. And that's the kind of strength that I like to draw on.
And I like what you called out too, is like this type of solidarity, this type of community, while it is never praised or honored the way it should and like often tries to be hidden, it's never been non-existent. Like I can definitely relate to growing up also in like a primary like all women household. My mom, my grandma, my older sister, my great grandma, all of the women I were around were proud to be a woman and like proud of that resilience. And growing up in that environment too, I never learned that I could ever be like less than a man. And I think for me, that really also showcased how much of this is taught and how much of this is tolerated, even if it's not something that someone is taught. I am curious, speaking more to like relationships and like solidarity, perception. Did you ever have like a negative view on being like a woman, or do you ever feel like that shows up in spaces of solidarity?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think when people come into organizing like meetings, like regardless of gender, there's like a little bit of intimidation just being in a new space and stuff. But I do see like if they're like a mother or whatnot, they have kids, you know, they're busy. Sometimes they like are a little down on their ability to like be present in the space and like contribute and like, or even feeling shy to like speak at like when we're asking like, oh, who wants to speak at such and such event. I do see sometimes, and I really do try to like just gas up my girls. Like it goes both ways in terms of like they should have the confidence, and we should also work to make the space accommodating for mothers, for especially working women, because it's little things that can add to that like feeling of I can't do this. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate like you bringing that up because I think like that type of labor is so overlooked in the grassroots organizing scene. Like none of that would happen if there wasn't someone organizing at home. Like if there wasn't someone making sure that like the family was good and that their people were good. And like I bet you see this a lot too with doing like police work with survivors and like victims of police brutality. Like families are always organizing on behalf of their loved ones. And then typically who that person is behind that is often the matriarch of the family that I've seen through my outreach work. Doing caregiving work, I would say like 99% of the people I come in direct contact with are mothers or grandmothers. And so like there is always an act of labor going on. There's always an act of caregiving going on that enables anything else to happen. And it hardly ever gets like acknowledged in the way that it deserves, especially knowing what that catalyzes as a result. Like nothing else could truly happen if there wasn't organizing like in the home.
I don't like the saying because it's like I don't want to prop up a man when I say this, but when people say like behind every great man there's a great woman, like there's a kernel in that, which is that there's this very real invisible labor happening that ladies aren't getting their flowers for in terms of like the work that goes into levels on levels. Like you kind of peel back the layers and you realize how much was needed to actually bring certain things to fruition. Like homemaking is labor. And it shouldn't be seen as like expected part of being, you know, whatever role, mother, sister, daughter, like whatever. I do want to flip it back, if you don't mind, just because.
Flip it back.
Let's flip it back. Because you working with your work, reproductive education with young girls, that's such a beautiful profession to have. Like, because remembering like myself as like a 12 years old, like that's a scary time. And if you want to, I don't know, do you want to speak to maybe like how that brought you into like maybe the path?
Yeah.
Because
I'm a fierce reproductive justice advocate. And for me, the reason why that is I genuinely do not believe we could achieve any level of sustainable social justice without adequate reproductive justice. Because when we're talking about reproductive justice, we're talking about the quality of life. And reproductive justice, the impacts of the lack of it often fall on, you know, people who are assigned female at birth, you know, women, because it is our bodies that are quite literally hidden from us. So if we're talking about like medical neglect that we have experienced, a really, really easy example to offer. So the clitoris is the only human organ designed purely for pleasure. That is its mode of operation, is to provide pleasure. And
Shout out.
Shout out to the clitoris.
Shout out.
We did not have a fully depicted medical model or like diagram of the clitoris until 2006. And it took a woman to do it. But our fallopian tubes were named in like the late 1800s, early 1900s by some French doctor who was a man. And so there is, historically speaking, this ownership over the woman's body that exists in spaces that we may not expect it to. And I think the medical model is an easy model just to point at because we can see how the neglect of women's health care has led to preventable deaths. We have also seen how the weaponization of women's health care leads to preventable deaths. You know, there's a reason why the infant and maternal mortality rate is as high as it is in the United States, especially for Black women.
Exactly. I do want to shout out you and Reproductive Justice Action Milwaukee in terms of I think a lot of people in the city but also in the state, because of what you were saying, that kind of shame narrative and that people don't realize when people say that Wisconsin is one of the better states for abortion, that's still a very, very, very low bar. And I think one thing that made that clear is when Planned Parenthood had that moment of getting their funding cut because it's where can you go now? And we could count on our hands 1, 2, 3, that's it. I think a lot of people don't realize is the fight for reproductive justice does not end at when at the state level there's a new threat and we beat it, quote unquote. It's always kind of up in the air in Wisconsin, in the country as a whole, but especially in Wisconsin. It's understanding that what you're saying, the deeper work of in the communities, making this widely accessible, widely as any other kind of healthcare needs to be.
So March 7th and 8th is International Women's Day weekend. March 7th, we are having a vendor market and workshops along with a keynote speaker and poetry performance, followed by a march and rally on March 8th. I'm really excited for this event because I think it is a very unique coming together of community in skill building, skill sharing, uplifting, solidarity. I think there is just so much that is going to be taking place throughout this weekend. What is it that you hope people take away from it?
Definitely the workshop aspect. I can sit down in this room, ask all the questions that I need to ask. I want people to take real notes, even get the notepad out. I think especially I don't know, in a time like this, it's scary, and I think people want to shrink away, even on top of the shrinking away that we've been doing for centuries. We can't shrink down in a moment like this, and I think feeling empowered through these workshops, through these skills, they range from so many different topics. We have a Know Your Rights because ICE terror is very real. I mean, not the same conditions as Minneapolis, Chicago, LA, but Milwaukee's not an insignificant city in terms of immigrant community, right? So be ready instead of getting ready, when the time comes. And a note on International Women's Day, it's International Working Women's Day. One of our slogans this year is, or demands is end the wage gap. And if I remember correctly, last year, a lot of people wanted to hear more about women in the workplace, on the shop floor. How do we fight back there? So I think that's a great one, especially right now, all this crazy stuff going on in the economy, how do you take that power back in terms of your own paycheck? I think that's a huge one that people should be paying attention to. And then yoga. Shout out Parisa. We're thinking about this in a very mind, body, spirit way. We're trying to make sure that our ladies have the resources and the skills that they can take out and for the rest of the year, how to be more in tune with themselves as a woman in their community.
Yeah. I think what's so special about this weekend for me is that the what has been talked about, right? We know what we have to do. What is really cool about this weekend is that it's an opportunity to showcase the how. How do we go about doing this? And we can go about doing it through listening into powerful speakers. We can go about it through gaining new skills we hadn't gained before. We can go about it through uplifting small, local, Black-owned businesses. We can do it by supporting organizations who are doing direct service work. It's a cool opportunity to say, we know what has to be done, and now we have the chance to come together as community and to talk about how we're going to do it.
Oh, yeah. Do the damn thing.
Do the damn thing. Can you put that in there?
Can we cuss?
That was Kayla Patterson and KJ Johnson. They're both organizers for Milwaukee's International Women's Day Coalition. To learn more about the coalition's weekend events, visit wuwm.com. This episode of Group Chat was produced by me and WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez. Group Chat is our monthly segment featuring local voices that aren't typically heard, expressing their own opinions. That's Lake Effect for today. I'm Xcaret Nunez. Audrey Nowakowski, Joy Powers, and Sam Woods join me in producing Lake Effect each week, with help from Graham Thomas. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer, and Emily Files helps edit the show. We also heard from Susan Bentz, Catherine Kokel, Mayan Silver, and Maria Peralta Ariano from the WUWM news team this week. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer, and Valeria Navarro Villegas is our digital operations manager. Trevor Shep wrote our theme music. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. And if you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again on Monday at noon for a new Wandering Wisconsin, where we'll explore the Racine Art Museum's Peeps exhibition. That's Peeps as in the Easter candy. Until then, thanks so much for joining us today on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.